All right, guys, so today I'm planning on giving you all what my baseline setup is for the super late models in the World of Outlaws Dirt Racing 24. The baseline I start with whenever I start setting up a car is what we're going to get into. Go to Circle Lake, a track that I haven't set up before yet, and the baseline on this car should be already what it is. So what I do is, of course, you go to Custom Race, and then this is where it kind of starts you at. Well, the first thing I'll do is go into the camber angle and raise the camber angle up to, depending on the track, like if it's a higher bank track, you'll go with more camber. If it's a lower bank track, you'll go with less camber. So like a flat track, 3.5 to 4 on your left, and say 4 to 4.5 on your right. And the reason why I always put more camber angle in my right front than I do my left front is because it's up on the track more. Like when I enter the corner, the right front is up on the track, and I don't know if that makes a hill of beans. That's just the way I think about it. This is not scientific, so that's why I always have less camber angle in my left front than I do my right front. And all the camber angle does for the car is how much grip, as you're turning the steering wheel, it's how much grip are in the front tires, how much they hold the track, I guess you could say. Because if you got too much camber angle, it'll hold the track real well, but it'll shear real quick and the front end will just go. If you got too less camber angle in the car, it'll feel real sluggish trying to turn it. So getting the camber angle, and it isn't that, I mean, it's important, but it's not important to get it like right on. If you get in that range on those types of tracks, then you should be pretty close. Like this, we're at Circle Lake and it's a mid bank. So I'm gonna probably go to I'm gonna probably do the, 3.8, and then on the right front I'll do a 4.5. Now when I drive it and it feels weird, I may change that later on. Then baseline, and this is just going to be straight baseline. I'll go through every one of these and what they do here in a second. But spring rate on the left front, I usually drop it to 280. Shock bump, I go to 3.0. Shock rebound 3.0. Tire pressures, I put them at 9 on the left front. On the left rear, spring rate, I usually drop this thing down to 220, 230. 3.0, 3.0, 9. Camber angle on the right front, we've already set. The spring rate in the right front, it really depends. Your spring rate in your right front controls, in this game, what I've noticed, more or less center out as the cars, as you're trying to turn out of the corner. If you've got too much right front spring weight in the car, it'll have the car push from the center out. And so you've got to, get in that range to where the car will turn, but it still has spring right in the front. But anyways, we'll start this thing down around 290. We'll just start it there. It really depends on where I start at as far as a baseline setup, depending on the track. But on this track, I'll start it anywhere from 260 to 290 in the right front. Shock bump, I always go 3.0. Tire pressure up to 9. Spring rate in the right rear, I try to get it close to what the left rear is, unless I'm on a really high bank track, like say I-55. Then I'll bump that right side up and that right rear up to a stiffer spring rate because of the banking. Shock bumps always at 3.0. Tire pressure on the right rear, I always do 11. No stagger. Front brake bias, I leave it alone. Cross weight, I've been playing with cross weight a lot, but generally late models, 54.5 left, 55 cross weight. And then the ride height, I generally go with -2 inches just to start off with. Chassis J-bar height, I like to be somewhere. I generally start off with this like a 14 and a 15, or a 15 and a 16, somewhere in that range. That's where I usually start at, but we'll go right here. Ride height in the rear at 2. Rear percentage, we'll go up to 58.5. Generally where I start at. Put my wheel lock at 30 degrees. And then that's where it's at. And that's generally my starting point. Well, then what I'll do is I'll go run a lap and see how the car feels. And as y'all can see by the goal time being 15.315 and I went a 15.816, I wasn't real happy with the way the car was. But that's neither here nor there. So I'll change that later on. But now let's go over what each one of these does. So on the spring rate on the left front, it's pretty simple. The higher the spring rate is, the easier the car will turn into the corner. The softer it is, the tighter it'll be trying to turn the car in the corner. So if you go stiffer, if you think about it like a car sitting there and this is the left front, and you put a pin in the left front as it's entering the corner, it'll want to swing around that pin. And that's kind of what you're doing on the left front with the spring rate. If you put a stiffer spring in, you're pinning that left front and helping the car turn into the corner. The shock bump actually acts like the spring, or somewhat like a spring in the left front. If you put more shock bump in, it makes this bump stiffer. The only thing is that actually makes your car tighter getting into the corner. Or if you put more spring rate in it, it'll free the car up on entry. If you put more shock bump in it, it'll make it tighter. So it kind of works the opposite a little bit. But a shock bump is like when you take a shock and you try to compress that shock. Well, that's shock bump. The stiffer it is, the harder the shock is to push together. The same thing on the shock rebound. It's on the pull out. Like if you were to pull the shock apart, that's what you're doing on rebound. And the stiffer it is, the harder it is to pull apart. The bump affects entry. The rebound will affect exit. So if you're stiffer on rebound on exit, it'll actually make the car tighter on exit. If it's harder to pull apart, the car will be tighter on exit on the left front. And then of course tire pressure is just tire pressure. It's I'm gonna be honest with you. I mean, unless you're on a really high speed track, like say a big old long Eldora, not even there, but it helps a little bit there. But like long tracks like 84 and like Williams Grove, tracks like that, a higher tire pressure will make a difference on the speed. But outside of that, if you generally stay around these three weights on your tires, 3 9s and an 11, like 99.9% of the time, that's where I'm at with all that. The left rear spring rate in the car, the more spring rate you put in it, the tighter the car will be off the turn. Like from center out, it'll cause the car to want to kind of drift towards the wall or push the nose towards the wall. So the stiffer you get on that is the tighter you'll get the car off from the center out. The shock bump on the rear, the front shock bump and the rear shock bump, both of them right and left, kind of work in tandem with each other. So whatever one side does, the other side does. So like if you up the shock bump on your left rear, it'll make the car tighter on exit, and same on the right rear. They do the kind of the same. So if you do them both the same, it'll be tighter on exit either way you go. Now the rebound's a little different because it's different on all four corners, but the shock bump on the front work in tandem, and what it does on the rear works in tandem. So whatever it does on the left front, it'll do on the right front. Whatever it does on the left rear, it'll do on the right rear. So on the left rear, like the shock rebound, the more you go with a higher number on the rebound, it'll free the car getting into the corner, or make it looser getting into the corner, or corner entry, I guess you could say. So the higher you go on the shock rebound on the left rear, is the looser the car will be getting into the corner. And then tire pressure, same as all those other ones. Run these tire pressures unless you get to a big old long track like 84, and then you can go up a pound and a half on each one of these. Right rear, sometimes you can go up 2 or 3 pounds more than this, but generally I just stay around these numbers. And again, on the right front, the camber angle, the same old deal. The more angle you get in it, the more turn response you'll get. But if you get too high, then it'll shear the front end. Like you'll go to turn and it'll just go. It won't turn. So in this game, if you stiffen the right front spring, it's supposed to make the car tighter on entry as you're turning into the corner. Because the same thing is, if you think about that, what I told you a while ago, if you pinned the right front tire to the ground, the car would swing around that pin to the inside, which would make the car tighter. What I have found with the right front in this car is maybe a little bit on entry, it does do that somewhat, but it makes it on throttle out. It makes, if you get too much right front spring rate, when you're going to try to turn it, it'll just push that nose straight towards the wall. So more or less, think about it, the stiffer the spring, the tighter the car is, the softer the spring on the right front, the looser it is on corner entry through the center. Shock bump, we've been over that. Same thing on the left front as goes for the right front. The higher you go with the rebound on the right front is the looser the car is on exit of the corner. So if you go higher with the shock rebound on the right front, the car will be freer from center out, getting out of the corner, because it doesn't let that right front extend. And then tire pressure, again, we've been over that 100 times. On the right rear, the spring rate, the higher you get with the spring rate, the freer the car will be through the center and off. And mainly the car will be loose on the throttle. So as you're as you're gassing up on it, it'll make the car freer. The stiffer you get on the right rear on the throttle, the car will want to turn more. Of course, again, all these things I'm telling you, just the opposite. If you go softer on some of this stuff that I'm telling you about, like if you go softer on the right rear spring, then it'll make it tighter on the throttle through the center and off. But when you throttle up, it'll make the car tighter if you go softer on the right rear spring. And the same thing with the shock bump. The higher you go with the shock bump on the rear, either one, it'll make the car tighter on exit. Just know that. It'll make it go tighter. So if you go softer, it'll free the car up off exit, on exit. But if you stiffen it, it'll make it tighter on exit. And that goes for both, like both rear ones. Now the shock rebound, the higher it is, the tighter the car will be on entry. The softer it is, the freer it'll be on entry. So if you go up on the valves, it'll tighten the car. Like if you're in a corner somewhere and the car's like wanting to kick out with you as you're getting to the corner, if you're stepping up the rebound on the right rear, it'll take some of that out of it. Now, a lot of these things you have to kind of do together in unison to make what you want the car to do. This is what actually each one of these things does to the car, I guess you could say. Tire pressure, same rear, same deal on the right rear. I mean, the tire stagger, it helps the car turn through the corner. So if you get in the corner and you're on the throttle and you need the car to turn a little more, there's a couple of places that I've used this at, and it leaves me right now where those things are at. But if you go through my setups that I've done or put out, there's only like 1 or 2 or 3 that I've had to use stagger in the car to help the car turn. I think one of them's Bristol, actually. I used it on Bristol on maybe the big block modifieds. I'd use it at Bristol to keep the car turning through the center of the corner. But more or less tire stagger, if you think about tire stagger, for those that don't know, if you think about a plastic cup sitting on a table and the bottom of it's smaller than the top of it, if you let it on the table and you roll it, it rolls, that's kind of what stagger is for the tires. It helps the car turn the corners. Now the front brake bias, to be honest with you, I never use brakes, so all it is all the front brake bias is like it's 40% to the front, 50% or 60% to the rear right here. If I was to do 20% to the front, that means I'd have 20% front brakes and 80% rear brakes. And what that does is the more front brakes you got in a car, the tighter it will be. The more rear brakes you got in the car is the looser it'll be. So if you want the car to turn when you get on the brake, then lower percentage here. If you want the car to be tighter, like when you get in the corner, you just want the car to kind of stop straight and not turn, then I would raise this up at least past 50, go to 60 or something on this, and that'll help the car stop straighter getting in the corner if you use a lot of brakes. Left side weight, pretty simple. I mean, if you think about the weight on your left side tires, that's what the weight is. The higher the percentage of left side weight in the car, the looser the car will be, or freer that the car will just overall be. It'll be a freer race car. If you want a tighter car, then you can drop the left side weight down and it will tighten the car up all the way around the track. It'll just make it tighter. So that's what left side weight is. It's just your left side tires, how much weight is on your left side tires compared to your right. And like right here, it's 54.5%. Well, that means that I've got 54% of my weight on my left side tires and whatever left on my right side tire. So just know the higher that percentage on the left side weight is, the freer it'll make the car. Yeah, so the cross weight is the weight from your right front tire to your left rear tire. It's that weight going across them 2 tires. More or less, the higher the cross weight is, the more traction you'll have on throttle. Like when you throttle up, it'll have more traction to the car and drive, to where if you take that number down and you get lower, it'll take traction out. On these late models is because it's the most traction I can get out of it. Now I can compensate around that. If it gets tight because of that, I can compensate around that and free the car up other ways, but I always want that traction there. So just know that on the throttle, the cross weight, the higher it is, the more traction you'll have in these late models. Now the ride height is something that I like to do on a flat track, on tracks that are small tracks or a flat track, either one. I like to take my ride height down to -2 inches, because it of course gets the car closer to the ground, and it also makes the car feel tighter to me. I'm not sure that it actually does that in reality, but it makes the car feel tighter to me when it's like that and closer to the ground. And I always lower both of them the same, because say if you had the ride height in the rear at just normal 000, and you put the ride height in the front at -2 inches, say, it'll cause the car to be free. It'll cause it to be loose, I guess you could say. The back end will want to pass the front up. So I always try to do them both the same, no matter what I do, because if you get them off, now you can use that as an adjustment. Like if you need a place like Norris County, we'll say, where it's a big circle, right? And you need the car to be free all the time, you might want to consider dropping your ride height in the front down, to a -1, -2, and keeping your rear ride height at the same, because it'll constantly have the car freed up. Chassis J-bar height, if the higher you go with it, the freer the car will be on entry. So if you go up to 20 inches on the chassis J-bar height, it'll free the car up getting into the corner. If you lower the J-bar height, it'll tighten the car into the corner. On the chassis J-bar height, I'm sorry. If you lower it on the frame, it'll tighten it into the corner. If you raise it on the frame, it'll free it up getting in the corner. And the axle J-bar height is just the opposite. The higher you go with the axle J-bar height on entry will tighten it up, and the lower you go with the axle J-bar on entry will free it up. So if you're low on the axle and high on the frame, then you're free getting in, if that makes sense. So that's the best way to think about the axle. If you have it maxed out height on your chassis and low on your axle, then the car, that's as free as you can make it with the J-bar. So you go somewhere in between that, or compensate, if you want to tighten up one way or the other. If you're low on the frame and you want to, or if you're high on the frame and you want to tighten the car up, you can lower it on the frame a little bit. And the ride height on the rear is the same that we talked about a while ago as the front ride height. I usually go with -2 inches, unless we're on a big track, and then I'll go up to 0 or maybe -1 inch. I always try to keep these two the same. But like I said, if you get to a track that you need the car to be freed up, maybe you can go to the ride height here to 0, and leave this one up here at 2 inches, and it'll free the car up. It's a what do you call it? A chassis adjustment that you can make if that's what you need. Rear weight, it'll affect the car differently on a small track versus a bigger track. A bigger track, it'll free the car up through the corner if you have a lot of rear weight in the car. If you have a high percentage of rear weight, it'll make the car turn through the corner a lot better on your bigger tracks. Eldora, Bristol, Knoxville, some of these places. On a smaller track, rear weight will help the car rotate the center if you get in and get turned and to get off the corner, I guess you could say. And so, like, I usually like on the smaller tracks to run a higher rear percentage than I do on the bigger tracks. Like your medium tracks, like say, I don't know, a Cedar Lake or a place like that, probably be around 56 to 57 and a half, something like that. On a little bit bigger track like this one, I've got this at 58 and a half. But if I go down to like, I don't know, Sterling County, I think it is, or Diamond Grove or some of these smaller places, I'll get up close to 59 and a half to 60, sometimes even more on the dirt late models. Just know that all it does is free the car up through the corner. The higher the rear percentage, the freer the car will be through the center. But on a smaller track, it'll help you rotate the center. Wheel lock's pretty self-explanatory. It's how far the steering wheel turns till it's locked, till you hit lock to lock. And mine is at 30 degrees, and you can change that. That's preference on, how much turning you want to do on your steering wheel. Steering offset really doesn't affect me per se on the dirt late models as much as it does the other classes, like the sprint cars especially. I will do more steering offset in them because it helps keep the car straight down the straightaway, because as you're gassing up, the car will want to pull one way. And so if you put a steering offset in it, then it'll actually straighten the car back up for you, where you haven't got that pull as you're going down the straightaway, and I'm sure you've had it where the car will pull to the left or it'll pull to the right. You can set a steering offset and just play with it till you get the car to where it stays straight with you and go with it. Tire compound soft, and I had somebody here recently. I'm going to be completely honest with you. I have never really messed around with a firm, medium, or soft. I've always been on soft. Like in some features, like if I got to run a long race, like a full 100% race, then I would probably either be on a medium or a firm tire. But as far as for qualifying, short races, stuff online, all that stuff, I always stay soft, because the tires never seem to wear out. But I have run some features here on here where I've set it the feature length up to 50 or 75%, to where I'm thinking that's where I'm going to get into the medium or the firm tire compounds. And then the rear end gear ratio, it's more or less how many RPMs you turn. I have found out that generally when I go to a dirt late model setup, I can usually go 20 points lower on my gear ratio than what it recommends when I first start out. If I drop, like if this was at 460, I think when we started, probably end up at a 440, and I would probably be pretty close on what the gear ratio should be for this track. Now, that's not a steadfast rule. That's just a good, starting point. Have a nugget in your head. There's some places like I don't know, Chili Bowl, to where whatever they recommended, I dropped way down below what that was recommended for that place. And there has been other places that I've went up a point or two, on gear with the rear end ratio. So you just have to kind of play around with that, what feels right to you on, when you're driving the car. Because I also have found out too that if you get too high of a gear in the car, even though it ain't hitting the rev limiter, the car just won't act right. It'll like kind of, I don't know, like a wild horse, I guess you could say. And so if you drop your rear end gear ratio down a couple percentage points, or a couple points, then it'll make the car start acting right again, or all right in the first place at least. All right, guys, I hope I haven't confused you all enough in this video. I've done my best to explain what I do and how I think about my setups on the dirt late models. I'll try to do videos like this for all the classes that we have, and that way that you all will know what I know. So, guys, I hope this has helped. We'll see you in the next video.